Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Every month, the second Wednesday, we look at the greatest ideas of Buckminster Fuller. And this is a particularly special idea because this was his epitaph. If somebody says, put this on my gravestone, you have to know that he thinks that this is a key idea. So let us explore it. I'm going to start with Maritza, who is leading these meetups, this series of meetups, is going to make a presentation. Then I'll have a little conversation with Maritza, and then we'll open it up. Please keep track using pen and paper of all the ideas that you have, any questions that you may have. Look forward to a very engaging discussion. All right, Maritza, the floor is yours.
Well, I would like to preface this by saying that I am in no way, shape, or form an expert. I've only been learning about Buckminster Fuller's concepts for the last few years, and then more recently, a deeper dive with the rest of you. So, but Trimtab, it's impossible for you to read anything about Buckminster Fuller without hearing about Trimtab, especially since, like Shrikant said, it's on his epitaph. So what is a Trimtab? A Trimtab is a tiny flap that controls the rudder on a ship or airplane. When the rudder needs to be moved, this tiny Trimtab is adjusted, and that creates a low pressure area on one side, and that turns the rudder. So Buckminster Fuller saw the Trimtab as a metaphor for effective individual initiative, where small and strategically placed interventions can produce large-scale changes. He believed that if he strategically applied his energy, he could steer the course of humanity in a better direction, despite being just an individual. So this is, especially enticing to me because this is a far more eloquent summation of different things I have said for years now. The beauty and importance of fostering, nurturing, and creating strong individuals in order to create a stronger community, society, culture. This is obviously, it's more eloquent. Shrikant, that's high-level synopsis. I can do a little bit more. You want to ask questions first? How are you thinking?
Sure. Let me first read the quote that we had on the meetup page.
Yes, please do.
So this is Bucky talking in one of the interviews, I think. Says, something hit me very hard once, thinking about what one little man could do. Think of the Queen Mary. The whole ship goes by, and then comes the rudder. And there is a tiny thing at the edge of the rudder called a Trimtab. It's a miniature rudder. Just moving the little Trimtab builds a low pressure that pulls the rudder around. Takes almost no effort at all. So I said that the little individual can be a Trimtab. Society thinks it's going right by you, that it's left you altogether. But if you're doing dynamic things mentally, the fact is that you can just put your foot out like that, and the whole big ship of state is going to go. So I said, call me Trimtab. Please continue, Maritza.
Excellent. Thank you. Every time I read that quote, it gives me chills. It's such a powerful statement, but it's actually stating something so simply. So when you hear that, you could think about the power of the Trimtab metaphor in different ways. What if you, instead of saying society, you say myself, or, what trim tabs could I find to create small shifts in awareness or behavior that might leverage a much larger effect in my life? So what speaks to me here is this idea of trim tab being a lever for us to use. And so the philosophy of trim tab is like, it's based on this concept of leverage and the idea that small changes can lead to big outcomes. And that feeds into, a concept that's also near and dear to Bucky that we've spoken about before pre-session, the idea of doing less with more. It's embodied into the concept of trim tab, because what you're doing is you are looking at how one small thing can create, can make most impact. So there's one other quote from Bucky that I want to share with you here. He says, the truth is that you get the low pressure to do things rather than getting on the other side and trying to push the bow of the ship around. And you build that low pressure by getting rid of a little nonsense, getting rid of things that don't work and aren't true until you start to get that trim tab motion. It works every time. That's the grand strategy you're going for. So I'm positive that what you do with yourself, just the little things you do yourself, these are the things that count. To be a real trim tab, you've got to start with yourself. And soon you'll feel that low pressure. And suddenly things begin to work in a beautiful way. Of course, they happen only when you're dealing with great integrity. You must be helping evolution. So this statement to me does a great job of defining trim tab in a different way and tying it to several other of Bucky's great ideas. And then additionally, explaining why it should be important to every one of us, why we should pick up this banner and why we should consider what it means and how can we internalize it as a concept, as a principle.
Maritza, could you do me a favor and read that quote one more time?
Absolutely. The truth is that you get the low pressure to do things rather than getting on the other side and trying to push the bow of the ship around. And you build that low pressure by getting rid of a little nonsense, getting rid of things that don't work and aren't true until you start to get that trim tab motion. It works every time. That's the grand strategy you're going for. So I'm positive that what you do with yourself, just the little things you do yourself, these are the things that count. To be a real trim tab, you've got to start with yourself, and soon you'll feel that low pressure. And suddenly, things begin to work in a beautiful way. Of course, they happen only when you're dealing with great integrity. You must be helping evolution.
Thank you. Would you like to say anything more, or do you want me to make some comments?
Please make comments.
Okay. So there are three things that really stand out here. One, clearly, it's the point of maximum leverage. So you're not just doing things randomly. You're not just trying to deal with the entire ship. I love this metaphor of the ship. There is this massive ship, and imagine yourself in water right next to it. Okay. And imagine yourself being a trim tab. Okay. So actually you going and grabbing the rudder and moving it a little bit using your entire body. Okay. So first is that you can't be anywhere. right? If you're right in the front of the ship is going to, push you aside, and you will be, you're nothing. So you really need to find the point of maximum leverage. The second point is that of subtraction, that he says, by getting rid of little nonsense, getting rid of things that don't work and aren't true, until you start to get that Trimtab motion. Now, Bucky's writing is amazing. He has his own way of expressing things. So this idea of subtraction, this is called via negativa, making progress by removing things. Most of us have a lot of things, and those things are actually cluttering up life. It's stopping us from focusing on the key things that matter. So that's the second point. So this first point was the maximum leverage. The second point is that of subtraction. The third point, I'll call it jujitsu, because you're using, see what you're doing when you're being a Trimtab. You are using your energy, actually a very small amount of your energy, in a place which actually ends up using the energy of the ship, the forward motion of the ship, to just put this little thing, and then the actual motion of the ship itself is being used to change its motion by the right application. So it's like you're not going, in jiu-jitsu and martial arts, you're not opposing the enemy. You're not confronting the enemy directly. You're kind of stepping on the side, and you're using the force and energy of the enemy himself to move him with a very little amount of effort from you. So that's another similarity that I saw. So these are the three things I see in this concept. I mean, it is a profound concept. I also like this where it is saying, there is this one article I found on the web about it, and it has a quote from Susan Sontag. Says, "The only transformation that interests me is a total transformation, however minute." Okay, so this is a very beautiful idea, that it is a total transformation, because if you say that, look, I'm going to keep swimming as I've always swum, then you're not doing this total transformation, because this is very intentional. You're saying, look, I want to actually move the ship. What do I need to do? And you're going ahead and doing that. So it's a profound concept. So I look forward to discussing it with everybody. Maritza, would you like to add anything else, or shall we open it up for any comments or questions?
I'm gonna throw one more quote in here for all of you. This one's actually from Amy Edmondson. She's written a lot about Bucky's works, and she's leveraging off of some of his interviews. And she says, she asked the question, "Do you feel like you're called to be a Trimtab?" Or somebody had asked her, and she's responding. She says, "Anyone can act as a Trimtab, in part by recognizing the potential downstream influence of small, high leverage actions pointing in the right new direction. The Trimtab's tiny movement has leverage, the right shift in the right place at the right time."
Wonderful. All right, folks. Now would love to hear what everybody else has to say. about the concept of Trimtab. Let me do one more thing. I'm going to read out these quotes one more time to prime everybody, and then go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. Something, again, this is the full quote from Bucky. Something hit me very hard once, thinking about what one little man could do. Think of the Queen Elizabeth. The whole ship goes by, and then comes the rudder. And there is a tiny thing at the edge of the rudder called a Trimtab. Now you have to understand that this is actually in the design of the ship itself. So that's the only way to actually navigate the ship. So it's not something that is an exceptional thing. No, you need a Trimtab for a ship like that. Otherwise, you can't navigate it. You can't direct it. It's a miniature rudder. Just moving the little Trimtab builds a low pressure that pulls the rudder around. So it is just, changing that, creating that low pressure. So you're doing something little in order to move the rudder around, and then the rudder is going to move the ship around. Takes almost no effort at all. So now this is, again, a characteristic. This is like Wu Wei. We've been studying Tao Te Ching. You're trying to understand, and it is at this level, Bucky operates at this level. You're trying to understand the universal laws that are operative in nature. You're trying to understand universal laws that are operative in human interaction, in societies, in individuals. And you're using that, you're acting along that. And there you have Wu Wei, which is action without action, or action with minimal effort. So I said that the little individual can be a Trimtab. Now this may seem odd, but if you look at history, there have been individuals like that. Because what happens is that they do something, they start moving, and then a whole bunch of people pile on the ship and say that we are driving it. But there are really kind of these few individuals who have had this kind of impact. Society thinks it's going right by you, that it's left you altogether. I also like this motion of the ship. See, his writing and speaking is very beautiful. He's saying this is going by, and then comes the rudder. So it is, he's not just describing it as in space, but he's combining the space and time together. This is a living thing. This is living motion. That it's left you all together. So it is operating as if individuals don't matter. That you're riding on the ship or you're on the side, doesn't really matter. But if you're doing dynamic things mentally, now this is like the whole thing. What does it mean to do dynamic things mentally? Because it's not just nice to have something. This is the core of what it is. If you're doing dynamic things mentally, the fact is that you can just put your foot out like that, and the whole big ship of state is going to go. So I said, call me Trimtab. Okay. Maritza, I'm going to leave the moderating to you for a few minutes. I have to take a call. But folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to comment.
Okay, no worries. So, right, I have Evanique up first. Go ahead, Evanique.
Yeah, one of the things just really quick that I did do a little research before the meetup, and I have found a YouTube video of there was people that were taking different aspects of Bucky and putting them into the different concepts. It was the name of it was something like Operation Spaceship Earth and the Trimtab. And what these people were focused on was future, works now. And, they were giving 5-minute talks. And what struck me is that the trim tab concept was throughout, which is like the small effort can lead to big results, like the trim tab guiding the whole ship. And I was thinking of Spaceship Earth. And I just think how it shows Bucky's character that he wanted to be known as a trim tab. This is something that's really not seen by anybody. That means it's not for the glory for him. Like it really isn't for the glory for him. It's for to move the lever a little bit, closer to having humanity work for everybody, or having everything work for humanity. And I think of that, and I think of the character of Bucky and how he wanted his life to be about helping humanity. So I think we can all look at it from a very real perspective and say, what effort can we do to move the ship? If you're thinking about it as Earth, like what can we do to move the Earth? And there were different people that were giving like 5-minute talks on what organizations they were participating in that were being the trim tab that was moving. These are things that you don't hear about in everyday life, or you wouldn't even know existed unless you were looking this up. But for these people, it was, for some of the presenters, it was their life's work to be the trim tab and to be a part of organizations that were going to have humanity work. So I just think of it as like looking at the character of Bucky. If you ever wanted to know, look at his tombstone. That's who he wanted to be in the world. And I just think that's admirable.
I would agree. Evanique, if you have easy access to it, it would be great if you could post that into the chat for us, just to look at later. Thank you. Something that you mentioned, it brings up the question of, how can one single individual make a difference in the world? So I am perpetually shocked to hear that so many people answer that question. Like, if not that question, but the question of, do you think that a single individual can make a difference? So many answer no. This concept of trim tab tells us that the answer here should, maybe not should, but could be yes. So what sparks human greatness? It's not that you woke up today and did something ginormous and showy and flashy and amazing. It's probably something small that maybe never even hit your radar. So it's like, the very first step, though, has to be the moment we stop believing that we're powerless and start trusting that while we may be just one single, we do have within us the power to affect change in the world. And so in many of his writings, and specifically in this trim tab principle, Bucky shows us that he's a firm believer in that statement. He believes every individual has within them the power to change the world. It exists. It's just a matter of harnessing it and working to make it come up out of you, right? So folks, go ahead and type an exclamation if you want to make a comment. Or if not, I'll just keep talking. So, I'm going to go ahead and go with Eleanor next. Welcome,
Wait,
Eleanor.
Maritza, Dej was first, I think.
Oh, wait, is there one more? Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed it. Apologies. Thank you, Evanique, for catching that. I apologize. Dej, go right ahead. And then after Dej, I'll call on Eleanor. Apologies.
For starters, this topic is, oh my gosh, it's very timely. I feel like for the last maybe 8 months, I've just kind of been focusing on this idea of small changes. And with that, I've kind of heard of this idea floating around called the 1%, where 1% of change every day, very small, minute parts of your day. I think 1% of your day is like 15 minutes. But doing something consistently in a way that's not, how do I say, like you're trying to overhaul everything or change everything about yourself or about the world with this one big action. A lot of times that leads to like burnout, being disenchanted. But doing something small consistently over time eventually adds up. You're at 5% change, you're at 10%. Okay, wow, now you're at 50. And so the idea of, I guess, the Trimtab or the 1%, it's sustainable. It's something that you can keep up, something that, doesn't feel overwhelming. And so it's actually really beautiful that you guys brought this up, because a lot of times, like, you can look at the world, society, what's going on, and just feel like, okay, I don't want any parts of it. But when you realize that, hey, a conversation that I could have with someone, or my involvement in an organization, like Evanique mentioned, could be a catalyst one day to change something. So that's kind of what I got from you.
Thank you. Oops, sorry, guys. Really timing. Click on the YouTube link. Thank you, Dej, for those comments. Much appreciated. Next up, I have Eleanor. Welcome, Eleanor.
Hi, thanks for having me. I think sometimes it's possible to change things, even if it's a single person. We have been recently experiencing many things where one person could change the laws, rescue lives, which affected actually pretty great other people's lives in a good way. And it depends on the need. If there's a need, probably it's going to work to change with one single voice. It also depends on timing. If the time is right and the need is there, then one voice is enough to change the things. Yeah.
So I think that I think Bucky looks at it a little bit more like, if you're always doing that little thing, then you're going to naturally find yourself in the right time, in the right place, with the right amount of force. Thank you, Eleanor. Next up, I have Judy. Welcome, Judy.
Hi there. I was thinking of Greta Thunberg. She was like 14 years old, and one day she took this protest banner and she just stood outside her door, her school. And that was like 5-10 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but the change that she has effected in the world, even including talking at the UN after all those years, but she started very small. And she started with one little protest, not even a march, just sitting outside her to protest the climate crisis. And she wouldn't go back to school. And then every Tuesday, more and more kids started copying her and doing the same thing, not just in her school, but other schools, until it became a worldwide phenomenon. Kids were doing this thing all over the world. So that's one person who has affected change, I think. And at that level, I'm also thinking of Rodney King and the civil rights movement, that when he was being killed and he just was thinking of love. Can't we all love each other? That was so potent, so strong, a message of love. It still rings in everybody's civil rights ideals. Can't we just love each other? Isn't that something that is so important? So I mean, those two figures just kind of came up to my mind when you were talking about this wonderful concept.
Thank you, Judy.
Mhm.
So those are very well-known, big name people who kind of they got propelled onto the world stage. But I don't think that you have to hit that type of world renown to be a Trimtab. If you're doing your thing, your head down, you don't have to be this big famous celebrity person to affect change. There's, I want to say many years ago, I was walking by somebody in DC who was, just a panhandler begging for food, asking for food. I don't usually give money, I give food. I happen to have been going to get lunch, and I just got double of whatever I was getting and gave it. And this was it was a reaction that, I've done that often. This reaction was different. He was super grateful. And it turns out he was a down on his luck veteran who had veteran housing on Monday. He just had to survive Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Very small thing. I ended up putting him in a hotel for those 3 days. And he actually came back later, and we still keep in touch. That's tiny. Am I truly changing the world on a grand scale? Like, am I banishing climate change or anything? Obviously not. But I think little things like that, where you're staying true, help shape the world in ways that we can't foresee. Because remember, everything you touch is touching something else. It's impossible to operate in a vacuum in this world. So you don't have to be famous. You don't have to have a lot of money to make change to the world. That's not the point of being a Trimtab. It's a
But-
matter of, so something I
But
want
Maritza, isn't they didn't know it when they started. They weren't famous when they started. Rodney King, when he was dying, he
Right,
wasn't famous.
right.
And Greta, when she stood outside the door of her school for the first time, even if her parents were behind her, but she wasn't famous. She
Right, and
became
that's-
famous much later,
And that's the point, is that what I'm saying is, let's not get caught up on whether or not you have to be famous
No.
to affect change in the world.
No. But when you do something out of your own desire to make some change, whatever it is, you usually start by yourself, alone. And then if people believe in your true thoughts and feelings and desires to improve things, the world, be it because of protest or love, like Rodney King, I think that will in itself be like a small little rudder that moves a big ship. I don't think they started famous, but they later became famous. Like Bucky later became, he started when he said that was his epitaph, he was already famous, So he said that when he was already famous. So what's the difference? I don't know. But I think that these two people influenced me in many ways, and probably many other people too, most surely other people too. Like Martin Luther King also. He wasn't really famous when he started. And there's so many other people that we can look at that they weren't famous when they started.
Those are all examples of potentiality of the Trimtab principle. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. There is, I have next up, I'm not sure how to say the name. I apologize, Eulers.
I think Paul was first.
Am I missing? Oh, how am I missing people? I apologize. Thank you, Evanique. Sorry, Paul. Go ahead, Paul, you're up.
Oh, thanks.
Apologies.
No, I didn't know who, where Euler was. So anyway, you guys always throw me off by saying things that make me want to say new things, and then I forget what my original things were. But here we go. I think that to Maritz's point and the point about the intentionality, take a guy like Martin Luther King. He did want to change the world. He had a specific mission like Buckminster Fuller did. Rodney King did not. But what my point is that Buckminster Fuller with his epitaph was being a Trimtab by teaching the concept on his gravestone of the Trimtab. So that's just another example. If you give us people the idea that small changes make a big difference, you're being a Trimtab just by that. That's all I'm trying to really say about that. But then some more things I was thinking about this is a big ship, the Queen Elizabeth, was designed with a rudder that they knew would be a little bit cumbersome, so they designed a Trimtab. But the systems that we're trying to change were not designed with the Trimtab. So it's on us to figure out the points of leverage. And I'm thinking of the human consciousness and human body, both mental and physical health. So although we weren't designed with Trimtabs, they exist. They exist in the body. They exist in consciousness. So it's on our responsibility to learn where they are. And a lot of the wisdom's teachings are teaching that. And a lot of science is trying to find that. Like the least intrusive surgery and things like that, and then consciousness and mental health systems. But the only other thing I want to add to the conversation is the problem or challenge, no, the responsibility of the fact that it works for whatever force you exert, small, the result could be terrible instead of great. The Trimtab principle applies to sink the ship. The Trimtab principle applies to have, like, take for example, the copycat shooters. So you can be a Trimtab that creates mass shootings all over the world. I just want to point out that what we're talking about is the power of finding a leverage point. And we have to be aware that, like any power, it's behooving upon us, which is why I think that last statement about integrity, Buckminster Fuller was saying that. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, yes, as one who does believe that things are in general neither inherently good nor evil, anything, person, being has the ability to go in either direction. And it's just why I wanted to make absolutely certain that I read out that line that included the concept, because he says they only happen when you are dealing with really great integrity. So it's, this concept of intentionality is so pervasive that should you not walk forward with intent and your innate integrity, because also if you adopt someone else's, you may be steered wrong because it's not your own internal principle. The thing about a Trimtab, if we want to look at the analogy again of the ship, a Trimtab, it remains straight and true when the pressure is on to go with the flow. So in other words, the composition of a Trimtab has to be durable enough to withstand extreme opposition. So it's a matter of it has a rigid composition, but it has flexible hinges and a freedom of movement in the hinges, and that's where the true power is, bending without breaking. And these are analogies that if you take them from the physical Trimtab towards your metaphorical Trimtab, you're not looking for Trimtabs. You're not looking for who is a Trimtab or what. You become the Trimtab. You be this thing that is strong enough to withstand pressure, to go against the currents if necessary, but flexible enough that you have freedom of movement to pivot and stay your course despite whatever's coming at you. I think that is the power that we have in this principle. When you look at it as something that you are internalizing, you're not seeking to find a Trimtab. You are seeking to be a Trimtab. Thank you, Paul. All right, I have Euler's up next.
Sorry, it was muted.
Hi.
I'm just what I thought of when Unique was talking about Spaceship Earth was an old 70s movie. I don't know whether anybody has seen it. It's something that I saw a long, long time ago and affected me quite a lot. It's one where there are spaceships, Earth is dying. They put up all these spaceships with sort of greenhouses and plants, but the spaceship has only got one person and 3 robots, and the robots have to look after the plants. It's an old 70s movie. It's quite depressing because at the end of it, he just gives up and blows up the spaceship. But the actual domes that the plants were housed in looked like Buckminster Fuller Eden glass houses. I don't know whether anybody can identify that movie.
And how are you tying this to the Trimtab principle?
It's just what Evanique was saying about Spaceship Earth, which is a Buckminster Fuller concept as well. Yeah, but I mean, it's just how the ecosystem is going at the moment.
Thank you. So if anyone else would like to comment, go ahead and type exclamation. I do see DLJ. Go ahead, DLJ.
Yeah, I think that the movie was, is my sound okay? Okay. I think the movie was Silent Running with Bruce Dern. And I think there were actually 3 people on the ship before, and he ended up killing 2 of them, something like that. So that's a nice one. Yeah, I'm kind of with Paul on this one. I'm seeing some downsides. Consequentialism, because you might do a change and it's not for the best, or you might do a change that is for the best but at the wrong time or in the wrong place when it's the right time, right? So there's a lot of hindsight to this, I kind of think. So it's great as an epitaph because he got it right, didn't he? He did do that. But if you're trying to do it with foresight, there's all those risks of, yeah, is it the right thing but the wrong time, or the right thing in the right time but the wrong place, or the wrong thing? But the analogy I'm thinking of in best practices would be continual improvement and quick wins. Quick wins is the thing I think is the kind of close thing here, because you don't always do the thing that's hardest to do or most expensive to do or most important to do. Sometimes you just do the thing that's going to get everybody on your side to do something next time. And I think that's the closest thing I can think of to what he's talking about here, right? So you do because it's about the creating that low pressure, right? In other words, you're removing that resistance to change. So I think it's the kind of quick win idea, which is fine, right? But as long as your idea is going to be for the benefit, which you only know in hindsight. So I'm sort of with Paul on this one.
So I think that, the fear of failing is something that can take us into an analysis paralysis that would be detrimental to life in general. We, I don't think that it's necessarily healthy to worry that we're too fragile to deal with life's failures or intense pain or intense suffering. If one is wishing to live one's life with intent and forward movement upon their meaningful path, then we have already accepted the banner of wanting to experience life's full-on challenge. So sure, there's going to be, pain with joy. There's going to be love and loss, sweetness and sorrow. But that's the dance of life. If you never put yourself out there, you'll experience neither. So I hear what you guys are saying about the fear that this concept of being a Trimtab could have dire consequences. Again, everything you touch touches something else. So there is always that in whatever you're doing. So if you are moving forward, not trying to be a Trimtab, you could still do something that would have explosively devastating consequences. I think the call here is that if one is intentionally attempting to be a Trimtab, the hope is that because of said intent, there comes in a little bit of what DLJ is saying here, a little bit of foresight that hopefully, and then again, there's no guarantees because there's no guarantee in life, that will hopefully now allow for a better outcome because you are doing so with intent instead of kind of running blindly in whatever direction you happen to point to first. That makes sense. So there's the question here. We're looking at, it's a fascinating idea, the idea of why we should not be overly concerned about if it's going to go for good or bad. And I'm of the mind that, moving forward with integrity and intent helps to mitigate that. But let's see, I have Avanique and Paul. Let's hear what they have to say on this. Go ahead, Avanique.
Yeah, something I was thinking of was Star Trek and the Prime Directive, believe it or not. And the Prime Directive is basically, when they would go exploring, it was like it was intentional that they would not try to alter the planet or alter it too bad. They were exploring. So the problem was when they saw something that they didn't like, or they saw something that was unjust, they kind of went against that rule, right? And I was thinking of that with this conversation of intentionality and, some people using the Trimtab concept, maybe not for good. And the thing is you're right, you don't know what other people are going to do, good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. It just means you accept it. And that's the hardest part, right? Like you're doing all this work, you're doing all this effort, and you're going along with intentionality to improve humanity. And some people may use that technology either now or far in the future when none of us are here anymore to use it with ill intent. What do? Either you don't do it because someone may use it wrong, or you do it and then you just kind of like know what you intended and and move on that way. I think that's the second one is your answer, because life is, you got to accept the positive and the negative. And then you have to also look at it as some people may use it not in the way that it's intended. In their mind, it might be better the way that they're using it. And so it's a hard concept, but I think with the Trimtab concept is I think the way Bucky intended it is that he was using it for good. Now, some people may take his concepts and use them for something that's not so good. He accepts that. I mean, he was a comprehensivist at the end of the day, so he knew in his mind, I think, that his concepts could be used for something that he did not intend them to be used for. And I think we have to kind of look at it the same way, that not everybody's going to have good intentions, and we accept it. We just have to accept that as a truth.
So Bucky used the concept for leverage, and he made sure to say, you have to start with yourself. You're using it on yourself, for yourself, with yourself. And the other ingredient is that you have to ensure that you're dealing with integrity. So I think that, so I am not left with the feeling that Bucky looked at things in this very polarized good versus evil thing, which we see so prevalent in today's world. I try to steer away from that type of dualistic thinking. I fail constantly, but then I reaffirm my my decision to attempt to steer away from it. But I think that in Bucky's writings, it seems to me he does something similar. So he's focusing on who he wants to be, what he wants to do. And so he knows what his internal principles are, what his makeup system, this system of self, he knows what it is. And so he moves forward with that. That is his base. That's where his starting point exists. So if you look at it that way, that's where one would apply or attempt to apply Trimtab concept, if that makes any sense. So I have next up Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think related to my earlier comment at the top that you said we could loop back on, and which relates to all of this, I wish Bucky were in this meetup, because I don't know if I'm abusing his concepts or not. And those of you who, we should get D.L. Jacobs, that actor, to be Bucky in one of our meetups. And we could say, Bucky, what do you think of this? So, because I need him right now. But when his comment of, it starts with yourself. See, I take that from my frame of mind to mean what you said we shouldn't do, which is, yeah, you can say be the Trimtab. We both agree that's something you can say. But then I mean also know thyself. And that means applying Bucky's principles to one's inner universe. And that means looking at yourself as the battleship and understanding where your Trimtabs are, so you can manifest the right action and control yourself as the battleship. I propose, and I want Bucky in this meetup so I can ask him, saying that that's a valid use of what he wrote on that tombstone. But you may disagree, and I don't know that very much about him. But secondly, about intentions, I agree with DLJ. We're having a communion party here who agreed with me that about the intention part of something that has bad effect could be accidental. Like we got into this discussion in the last few minutes about evil and stuff, but I mean, oh, I'm a company down in Antarctica and I want to melt a glacier. It should have nothing to do with Battleship Earth. I mean, the Earth, nobody's going to notice. I'm just going to melt this glacier and get a zillion tons of warm water. But that's a trim tab for Earth from a climate change perspective. So I want to apply the concept in those ways. I don't know if you guys agree or not.
Maritza,
Yes,
okay, I'm back. Can I start moderating?
sure.
Okay, so I do have response to Paul, but before I do that, Maritza, I'm going to ask you a very tough question. Can you summarize what happened so far after I left? Just impressionistic.
Okay, so impressionistic. We as a collective group are struggling with the principle of Trimtab in so much as how it applies as a person without viewing it as something outside of ourselves, and how do we get around the concept. So many people keep alluding to the idea that a small change can have great impact. They agree with that, but the concern is, what if the small change has a great negative impact, and how do we mitigate this? I've been trying to, at least my personal opinion is the idea of, tomorrow's not certain. We're not clairvoyant. If the important key words to help mitigate that, to my mind, are intent and integrity. We're still going back and forth a little bit here on that.
Let me do it this way. Let me admit this person. Actually, let me ask everybody, everything that you've heard, just not conclusions. I just want questions. What are the big questions that have been raised? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to. So one of the questions is that, what if it is negative? How do you handle the negative? The question that I heard Paul ask actually is, what about your own trim tab within you as a person?
What about yourself being the ship, and how do you identify your trim tabs?
Yes, your own trim tab. He also said, okay, how do we use Bucky's ideas? But anybody else wants to put on the table, what are the questions that you heard? Not new questions, but what are the questions you heard behind everything people have said so far? What are the big questions? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to put it on the table. Okay, if
like
not,
DLJ has his hand up.
was it DLJ? Okay, DLJ, go ahead.
Well, no, actually, as I put the exclamation mark, it was then covered. It's whether it applies to the individual. Because if it applies to the individual, you are the trim tab and the. Actually, in your reading, you said Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, and I don't know which one to choose now. One of the liners, anyway. So yeah, if you're the liner, then what is your trim tab? Is it your little finger or so? You change a little finger and it changes the rest of it. It doesn't quite work for me. So yeah, it's the individual. Can you extrapolate to the group? And was that Bucky's intent? I think it was Paul's extension.
Very
and
good.
Then the road to hell quote I put for the other one, which is the William Blake thing.
Okay.
Good intentions could lead to disastrous consequences.
Sure. Okay. All right. So let's discuss. Maritza, is it okay if we just discuss these questions, and then we will go from there? So I want to first talk about the individual trim tab. And actually, Bucky's. So first thing, is that you really have to commune with Bucky. Paul, I have news for you. Bucky is here, in the sense that his writing is there, his videos are there in massive quantities. So if you really want to really know where he is coming from, I mean, there is plenty. There is plenty. It's actually better than having Bucky in this meetup, because he has done at least, like, I want to say about 500 to 1,000 hours of meetups. And that's what he did. And he did. And and those are all available online. And so I recommend everybody to spend time actually hearing him, because when you're trying to get ideas that are this deep, you kind of have to spend the time communing with those ideas. It's not enough to kind of do a little bit and then jump to what you're thinking of. At the same time, after having communed with the idea, you should be jumping. That's the whole idea of Bucky, that these are all comprehensivist ideas. So you want to take the idea and say, okay, you know what? I see it applied this way. I see it applied that way. That's exactly what Bucky wants you to do. Now, in terms of being your own Trimtab, I think that's a core idea of Bucky. Bucky said at the age of, I think 32 or something like that, he said, like, look, I've been living based on everybody else's ideas. So my ship has been driven in directions which are completely different than what, they have been kind of, it has been shaped by people around me. And I've been just reacting to that. Now, what do I think? Now the question is, what is the Trimtab for him? So firstly, Bucky is very different from modern thought. And he's in the same category that we are studying, Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, Gospel of John, because he's a transcendentalist. All his core ideas come from there. And though he's not explicit about it, they actually permeate. So it's an idea of that there is this integrated universe that we are all dealing with. The thing that he adds is that you have to interface with the universe by yourself in an authentic way, not through, there is no secondhand God. You have to deal with God directly. And God here, he actually puts universe in place of God. So it is kind of a secular version of that. It's that integrity. But what he's really focused on is the universal principles. Now, and that is how, because intention that he's talking about is in the context of that. Moderns, when they think of intentions, they think of your emotions and say, oh, I feel this. This is my intention. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying, take the time to commune with the universe itself. Listen to everything. Say that I'm going to just take things which are universal, and I'm going to work only with those things. That is the way in which the negative is handled, because negative is usually something which is disintegrating, which is benefiting one thing at the cost of another. Whereas his entire mind, his entire approach is to focus on the universal principles that are applicable everywhere, that are good for everybody. That's what he's focused on. And that's the kind of Trimtab that he's focused on. And then in terms of what is your Trimtab, okay, I mean, that's a very deep psychological issue. I don't know where he has dealt with it. It's very difficult to grapple with Bucky, because he just talks voluminously. And he's going effortlessly goes through this and that. So you kind of have to, go through all of that to kind of figure out. But as best as I can see, he would say your relationship with the Tao is the Trimtab. So your devotion to the Tao now. It's a highly dynamic thing. He uses the terms gravity. He uses the term kind of love. It's your love of the universe. It's your love of the Tao. The most universal things, because he sees the two factors. One is radiating, that means applications of this principle, and one is coming back to the root, which he calls gravity or love. So that I would say is the is this. But Paul, go ahead. And folks, I would love any comments on anything. Give me just a second. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Srikant. You're hitting all the points that are my questions in a really great way, because watching him, first of all, just briefly on that, it's hard for me, and I'm not really good at absorbing his information by hearing him say it. I'm just sorry to say that. But on the other hand, even if I can do more of that, I'm not sure I'll get what I want, because things have happened in psychology. I want to hear his comments on those things. I want to hear how, in this trauma seminar I was in, they noticed somebody has suicidal ideation, but they have PTSD, post-traumatic, stress. And it turns out that getting rid of the avoidance of the memory is a trim tab that opens the door to navigating away from suicidal ideation, changes the whole mind. Bucky had never heard that before. That's new in the last 5 years, maybe. So I want him to hear all this, but we have to make up what he might say against this principle, and I love doing it. So that's my...
Yeah, thank you. Paul, I mean, kind of a short answer to this. I don't know this too well, but the short answer to this question is that actually Bucky is coming from a psychology which is very deep. And actually it's the same thing that I see commonality between the Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and Gospel of John. It's the transcendental movement is what he's basing it on. And it is far deeper than most schools of psychology in the modern times that I see. So if you get that, I mean, there is really no way other than actually getting that, So probably I would recommend somebody like Louis Sullivan, who's been more explicit about these things. And then without taking and that entire branch, that entire way of looking at psyche is incredibly deep. And so you really have to kind of immerse yourself in it. And then you will be able to, take something in the modern times and do it. I don't see any other way to do that, because it's too large an area. Compared to that, the modern psychology elements are just kind of, this interesting observation, that interesting observation. But what he's doing is actually the ground on which these figures play.
Can I say one more thing?
Please.
I think, respectfully, you're not giving enough credit to people like Marshall Linehan, who studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, who was saved from her suicidality by Buddhism, who incorporated those teachings that you are talking about, along with neuroscience that Buckminster Fuller did not have, and brought something new to the table. Last 10 years, maybe.
Sure. No, I understand fully. I think I'm not saying that there is no value in what is being done. What I'm saying is that if your purpose is to apply idea A to idea B, you have to understand idea A only then you can apply to idea B. I mean, it looks like you've spent a lot of time on idea B. If you want to apply idea A, you don't have a choice other than trying to understand it. There is no shortcut, because then you'd really need to understand both things deeply. So I'm not, I'm just making a general comment of what I have seen in psychology. I'm sure there is good things in that, because it's very large, it's, I mean, what is, the profession is very large. So even if 90% of it is crap, you still have something, 10%. And that total value of that is going to be significant. So absolutely. But that's what I would say. You do need to study that in order to make the full application. Next up is Maritza.
So I'm going to attempt to address a little bit both of what you said, Shrikant, and what Paul mentioned. So I have, again, not an expert in Bucky, also not an expert in psychology, but I probably read too much and spend too much time focusing on too many things. So I'm going to try this. So Bucky, from my understanding of it, Bucky saw the Trimtab concept not just as this like mechanical device. He also saw it as a way of thinking about how to affect change, right? And Paul, you brought up, what about in complex systems? Because Bucky was always thinking about complex systems, let me remind you, human is a complex system. So the answer there is yes. He's thinking of Trimtab as complex system, either human complex system or other complex systems. And he believed that by taking small strategic action, individuals could have a significant impact. So if that becomes your axiomatic statement, now we look at this from, how do we look at this concept of taking small strategic action to have a significant impact? Let's apply that to a psychology attempt. If you're struggling with something and you're seeking to change this behavior, which is usually what happens in psychology environment, so you can use this concept of Trimtab by making a change or small change in a behavior or an attitude so that you can target a larger shift in thinking or behavior. So that's the way I would equate it. And I think that if you do the if-then statement like that, you can apply it to so many different things, because the basic thing is triangle, actually. Remember that we talked about how the tetrahedron is the smallest, stablest unit. So when seeking your Trimtab, you're seeking that smallest, stablest unit. So if you're looking at it from a psychology perspective, again, my opinion, if you're looking at it from psychology perspective, what is the smallest, stablest thing that I can change that will help me make the greatest change, larger change in behavior or in thinking? So just my thought, my attempt to answer that for you.
Okay, excellent. I like that very much. I want to ask people questions about individual Trimtab. What do you think is the Trimtab for human beings? What is this? What is that? What is it in us which you think is a Trimtab? If you want to come up with candidates which you think, where is the point of maximum leverage in you for shaping your life? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that question.
Shrikant, while folks are thinking, I'm going to take co-host privileges and answer first.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking one's force of will would be my answer.
Excellent. Next up is Evanik, followed by DL Shea. Evanik.
I think, why can't,
Go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's your soul or consciousness is your Trimtab. It's the tiny thing that you cannot see, but that it guides you if you listen to it. So consciousness, or I think of it as a soul. That's what I think.
Wonderful. Thank you. DL Shea, what's your Trimtab?
So I'm going to disagree on soul and the consciousness.
No, not disagree. What do you?
Hang on. No, it's all right. Just quickly, conscience. I think is that little trigger in your mind that's your conscience. I tell you what, I think people think it is. It's that fantastic post on social media that's going to change the world. I think that's the world we're living in at the moment.
The people, just what's your Trimtab? What do you think is your Trimtab based on your experience of yourself?
No, I haven't got one. I think it's yeah, I'm not even sure I agree with the concept yet. So I'm not sure I can find one.
Next up is no problem. Eleanor.
I think mine is a will to survive.
Very good. Thank you. Judy.
I've always focused on my core. I can relate to that since very early ages. You know, what drives me is my core. And I can't explain to everybody or anybody what that core is, but I understand it in myself. I understand what it is. That's what drives me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. You know, I like all the answers because I think they are all pointing to the same thing, whether it is will, soul, consciousness, conscience, will to live, your core. It's, you know, your center. Next up is Paul. Paul, what's your Trimtab?
Well, being really analytical about it. So if I think of the Trimtab as this little thing you can change to make a big difference in your own consciousness, I wouldn't pick the soul because that's this permanent, that's just I would pick values. If I change my values, the whole ship changes.
Okay, thank you. Maggie.
I don't exactly know how to articulate it, but I think my trim tab is my ability to see what could be the great way that things could go, and my burning desire to do whatever it takes to get to that.
Okay, very good. So I will add a few things. Desire. Okay. So I will add a few things here. And then what I'm going to do is there is this great quote that from Buckminster Fuller that I'm going to read out. And because I think this is something that he did every day. So I want to bring that in. So, I mean, another way I can put it is your love, you know, your capacity to love the world itself. So your love of the Tao, if you will, that would be like equivalent of values, but it would be like one thing instead of plural, because it has to be one thing. What Maggie said, wait a minute. We got Connie. Connie, go ahead.
I was going to say wanting to make a difference.
Wanting to make a difference. Excellent. Then the other thing that Maggie was saying was seeing what is possible. So there is imagination, the power of imagination. What's the role of that as a Trimtab? Burning desire, wanting to make a difference. I see it as your capacity to be present, to be aware, to be actually conscious right now in the present, because really that's all you got. That's the point, because you're looking for something which is very small and something that can make a difference. So if you are actually aware of the deepest things in the present, and it's a small thing, remember it's description, because it has to be something that is small, yet you can do it multiple times. So this Trimtab is not just, it's basically, it is actually an action that is taking place. It is actually creating that low pressure that is moving things. And at a given time, during a given time, it is moving it only so much. So I think it has something to do about the present. What I want to do, it may seem to be disconnected, because I think that Buckminster Fuller's ideas are all, integrated together. And you kind of have to see like a whole bunch of his ideas. So for example, you have to understand synergetics in order to understand Trimtab. They're saying that there are these relationships that flow through the entire network. If you get the points right, if you get something right in the network, it will have this kind of synergetic effect. So that idea of synergy is very much built into it. I want to read out this one thing. So firstly, does anybody have, now people have put some things on the table as being what they think is the Trimtab. Now I want to give a second round if people want to comment on anything. Now, after having heard what so many people think is the Trimtab of human beings, if you would like to now speak a little bit about what, how you understand Trimtabs in human beings, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Would love to hear what you have to say. Let's start with Maritza. Maritza, what do you think of everything that people have said? What do you think?
So I have a bias because, I did say, force of will. I think of will as one's intent. So in my mind, the small thing within me that can move mountains would be my my will.
Yasuhiko calls it, your ability to say yes to the world.
Yes,
so that
I like that.
affirmation of it, and it is affirmation of yourself. So you're saying I am, and you're saying to the world, it is. And you're saying that at the same time, and there is an ethical component to it. So you're committing yourself to act in accordance with it is. So it is like in Bhagavad Gita, it is Atma, which is you, your will, your soul, and Brahma, which is the universal principle. So and seeing it as one. So your commitment to acting in accordance with that. So that's how, Gita looks at it. Next up is Dej. Dej, go ahead.
I think it also can be, a Trimtab can be in, when you mention that it's something active, it's something that's being consistently done. I think the ability to disagree, sometimes when everybody else has this idea that they're following, you sometimes being the person that says, I don't agree, and being, I guess, conscious enough to have that conversation in a, I guess, a agreeable manner. A lot of times you'll see that other people actually disagree, or they've never explored the idea further than, this is just what's commonly accepted. So I think being that person that's constantly willing to, hey, when I don't agree with something or when I have a different point of view, I can contribute that, and that can, help people round out their way of processing and thinking things.
Desh, that's a brilliant point. And actually that's, in Bucky's biography, that is a core point. At the age of 32, he said, look, I've lived all my life based on expectations of others. Now I say no to that. He says, I'm now a guinea pig bee. I'm a guinea pig, and I will, through my own experience, see for myself what is true and what is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it, regardless of what other people think. So it is absolutely, I think it does start with no in order to say yes to yourself and to the universal principle. You have to say no to whatever it is that is occupying that place in you. So excellent. Maritza.
Shrikant, one more thing that we touched upon briefly during your absence was we did, I pointed out to folks that a concept of Trimtab is that a Trimtab remains straight and true when the pressure is on to go with the flow. So its composition must be durable enough to withstand extreme opposition, but then it has hinges, so it can be flexible enough to have freedom of movement.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Now, I want to do something unusual because it just shows the range of his thought and where he's coming from. Okay, so this is something that he did. He calls it, his version of ever rethinking the Lord's Prayer is what he calls it. Because what he's doing is that he's saying, don't just go with the words that are given to you. You formulate it exactly in the way in which you can experience it. And this is actually a completely secular version of capturing the principle that the Lord's Prayer is trying to do. Then he goes on to write his prayer. So what he says that since 1927, this was what he said in, I think, 1979, okay? He says, since 1927, whenever I'm going to sleep, I always concentrate my thinking on what I call ever rethinking the Lord's Prayer. Okay, this is, again, it's like, I think the best word that I found for it is the Tao. It's like your relationship to the Tao. What will you say to Tao? That's what, you're just talking to Tao. Or you're, in Bhagavad Gita, it's like you're singing with God. Not even, you're to God, then you're listening and you're singing with God. So it's like, it's the idea of just speaking to reality from the core of your being. So this is his version. It's a little long, but try to see the flavor of it, okay? To be satisfactory to science, okay, he actually breaks all these distinctions that moderns have between science and religion, between intuition and reasoning. He brings them all together and shows the integration of it. To be satisfactory to science, all definitions must be stated in terms of experience. Now, no scientist is going to disagree with us. This is what actually science does. I define universe as all of humanities in all known time consciously apprehended and communicated to self and others experiences. So now he's bringing in the entire cultural context of the entire world. In using the word God, I'm consciously employing 4 clearly differentiated from one another experience and engendered thoughts. Firstly, I mean those experience engendered thoughts which are predicted upon past successions of unexpected human discoveries of mathematically incisive, physically demonstrable answers to what theretofore had been misassumed to be forever unanswerable, cosmic magnitude questions. Wherefore, I now assume it to be scientifically manifest and therefore experientially reasonable that scientifically explainable answers may and probably will eventually be given to all questions as engendered in all human thought by the sum total of all human experiences. Wherefore, my first meaning for God is all the experientially explained or explainable answers to all questions of all times. So this is like, I mean, the way I see it is he's saying Tao and the process of getting to know the Tao through your consciousness, through your authentic experiencing and putting together yourself and picking up everything that anybody else has done, facing all the unknowns and trying to know them. Secondly, so this was just the first meaning. Secondly, I mean the individual's memory of many surprising moments, of dawning comprehensions, of interrelated significance to be existent among a number of what had previously seemed to be entirely interrelated experiences, all of which remembered experiences engender the reasonable assumption of the possible existence of a total comprehension of the integrated significance of the meaning of all experiences. I will put it in terms of everything that seemed to be varied phenomena is trying to see what is it that explains all of it, what principles. So this is like a search for universal principles across all of your experience. Thirdly, I mean the only intellectually discoverable a priori intellectual integrity, indisputably manifest as the only mathematically statable family of generalized principles, cosmic laws, thus far discovered and codified, and ever physically redemonstrable by scientists to be not only unfailingly operative, but to be in eternal, omni-interconsiderate, omni-interaccommodative governance of the complex of everyday naked eye experiences, as well as the multi-million-fold greater range of only instrumentally explored infra and ultra-tunable micro and macro universe events. Now, he has a way of speaking which is unusual. What he's doing is that he's using language to shake you up from your common patterns and to make you see things that are common. Because what he's doing is that he's painting all these phenomena and he's saying, what are the principles underlying all of this? Fourthly, I mean all the mystery inherent in all human experience, which as a lifetime ratio to eternity is individually limited to almost negligible, twixt sleepings, glimpses of only a few local episodes of one of the infinite myriads of concurrently and overlappingly operative, sum totally never-ending cosmic scenario series. So there is the concept of mystery here, of saying that you are trying to face not just known knowns, you are also trying to face the unknown unknowns, not just known unknowns, but unknown unknowns. So it is a mind that is open to that. And that's the heart of science, of taking unknown unknowns with this, full integrity, intellectual integrity, and trying to make sense of it. With all these four meanings, I now directly address God. Our God, since omni-experience is your identity, you have given us overwhelming manifest of your complete knowledge, of your complete comprehension, of your complete concern, of your complete coordination, of your complete responsibility, of your complete capability to cope in absolute wisdom and effectiveness with all problems and events, and of your eternally unfailing reliability to do so. So let me see if I can make it a little shorter. Give me just a second here. Okay, I want to make the point about gravity. Give me a second. So this is part of the critical path. So I, encourage you to read the whole thing. But I just want to stop here for a moment and see if you have anything. Okay, you know what? I need to make one thing, and that is about his point about gravity, radiation and gravity. Okay, it's like radiation and gravity is like differentiation and integration. It is things that separate out, like the expansion, and then you're coming back to the root, coming back to the principles. So the gravity is the one going back to the principles that are holding commonalities between things. Radiation is things moving out. By glory, I mean the synergetic totality of all physical and metaphysical radiation. See, he takes into account, he takes like physical and metaphysical in same breath. And that's the idea of taking the metaphors. Actually, metaphors work like that you're taking something physical and then you are applying it to abstract, more to conceptual things. And of all physical and metaphysical gravity of finite but non-unitarily conceptual scenario universe, in whose synergetic totality the a priori energy potential of both radiation and gravity are initially equal, but whose respective behavioral patterns are such that radiation's entropic and redundant disintegratings is always less effective than gravity's non-redundant syntropic integrating. Radiation is plural and differentiable. Radiation is focusable, beamable, self-sinusing. It is interceptible, separatist, biasable, ergo has shadowed voids and vulnerabilities. Gravity is unit and undifferentiable. Gravity is comprehensive, inclusively embracing and permeative in non-focusable and shadowless, and is omni-integrative, all of which are characteristics of love. Love is metaphysical gravity. So I just want to see what people think, because you see, all of this is like the base of how, of Trimtab. Without this, you can't get to Trimtab, because Trimtab is not, he's talking about Trimtab within you and Trimtab between people. And all of this about focus on taking on all of the experience of everybody and trying to see the structure of it, universal principles of it, and acting based on that. This is the epistemology. Trimtab is the final technological step, but it is all based on this epistemology. So would love to hear any comments. Did you think that this was pertinent? Did you think that this was off topic? What is the connection between what was said here and the concept of Trimtab? Would love to hear what you guys think. Marissa.
Folks are queuing up. So I am delighted that you brought up the Buckminster Fuller's The Lord's Prayer. So just so you guys know, that's in the Self-Disciplines of Buckminster Fuller. That's Critical Path, chapter 4. That's actually the first chapter in the book Critical Path that I read. And that it would be a fantastic chapter for any of you to read if you're seeking an internal clarification for the directionality of one's Trimtab, or how one would internalize a concept of Trimtab. That, I think that would be a great starting point for you. In this chapter, among several other points he's making, is he speaks directly to this concept of intent and these concepts of intent and integrity, and he tells us, he talks about the idea of, to address directly some comments people have made, it's like you can make a Trimtab and it can go sadly wrong. He points out in this chapter, he says, by and large, I seem to have made more mistakes than any others of whom I know, but have learned thereby to make ever swifter acknowledgement of the errors, and thereafter immediately set about to deal more effectively with the truths disclosed by the acknowledgement of erroneous assumptions. And I think that that helps to point out to us that Bucky didn't have any expectation that every small action was going to be stellarly perfect. But if you accept that and you still move forward with your conviction, you're going to clearly see, oh, once this is an error, instead of being paralyzed, you'll pivot. Again, that takes us back to this idea of a Trimtab being both rigid enough or strong enough to withstand opposing currents, but flexible enough to pivot if necessary. And you can see that here. And even in the bit that Shrikant read of the Lord's Prayer, he's redefining certain terms in hopes of pointing out to us that all of these things are around you, within you, and it's all integrated in some way, shape, and form. Thank you, Shrikant.
Great point, Maritza. I mean, you can look at like your entire belief system, what you think, all your ideas, all your habits, all your emotions as the ship. And this willingness to correct, I think, I don't know where I read, but it is saying that, this eagerness to quickly surrender to truth, of saying, okay, if it is true, I'm wrong, I quickly surrender to truth, saying that's what it is. And that's what the Trimtab, that is a Trimtab, because what you're doing is that by saying, oh, the ship is going the wrong way. And that action of saying, oh, that I was wrong, that is the way you're changing the course. And a person who does that on a routine basis, who actually, instead of, most people, have the confirmation bias, they're always looking at the world saying, what can I see that confirms what I hold? Implicitly, they're looking at the world like that. And they will just cherry pick. They will just take things, notice things that do that. This mental principle or process is to say, be on the lookout for things that are contradictory. If I was wrong, what do I expect to see? And that is a very powerful way of changing your thought and your habits and your emotions over the long run. Excellent. Does anybody else have any thoughts about this Lord's Prayer that we looked at? I mean, it's the other thing that you notice is that this is completely secular. A scientist could be saying all of it. Maybe you will change the terms a little bit, but essentially the meaning, when you read, for example, Newton's writings or Einstein's writing, this is exactly what they're trying to do. All right. Anybody wants to comment? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Otherwise, we can go to the next point. Let's see here. Anybody? Okay. All right. So now let me ask you about what you found interesting about this concept of Trimtab, and that's where we will kind of wrap up. What did you get from this? This meetup, this idea of Trimtab, from Bucky, his way of thinking. What are you leaving with? Go ahead and type exclamation mark to share what you thought of this meetup. I'm going to start with Evanik.
So what I got from this meetup is it just takes the smallest step, like with the Trimtab and the concept of it with the little, it's like a little lever that can steer a big ship. So it starts with the smallest thing. And I think it starts with the individual is what I'm taking away. It starts with you. What are your values? What do you think you like? What do you want to do to change the world? Like, what change do you want to see in the world? How do you make humanity work? It puts the responsibility on you. And it doesn't mean that you're responsible for the whole thing, but you are responsible for your part in it. We are all here at this moment in this time for a reason. In 2023, there's something that compelled us to be here tonight. There's something that compels us to survive, and maybe it is biology, but there's also something that we can leave in this world. And the question is, what is it? And it's only a thing that you can answer. And I think in a world where most people look at what the world can give to me, I think that concept that the world owes you something is not true. I just don't agree with that. Like, I don't think the world owes you anything. I think it's, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to see in the world? And then be that, right? Because we all can say we want the world to be great, but then how are we being great? What are we doing? How are we changing ourselves to be the change? And you see that through different concepts and different religions. If you look at the basic core concepts when you study religions, it's about that concept. It's like, who do I want to be in the world? Like, who am I at my core? Because that's the only way you're going to really change it. I think that's the Trimtab in a nutshell. Is, who am I going to be? Because then who I choose to be is the Trimtab.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And it is such a profoundly empowering concept. It is saying that, don't look at the world passively. Don't say that, don't be a spectator. You can do things, and you can do big things. And also there is an implicit thing here. It's like you have to have, he says, dynamic way of thinking. So you have to have that, a certain way of thinking in order to do that. And it is possible to learn that. So it's such a, such an empowering idea. Folks would love to hear what you got from the meetup. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark. We're going to go with Paul, Judy, and Maggie. Paul.
Yeah, I really am glad you read that. It put some things together in my mind about the spirit from which Buckminster Fuller operated. And it's this seeker's mind. So as far as Trimtab, and also some of the conversation earlier, and also his breaking down of all the categories. So again, I'm so grateful that I'm living in a time where there's some people who think like Buckminster Fuller, that there's not something called psychology, and then there's something called religion, and there's something called spiritual growth. There are a set of people that are breaking down all those barriers. And in that third wave, I'm hearing that spirit from Buckminster Fuller, especially in like acceptance and commitment therapy, which its whole goal is psychological flexibility. So what I took from you, Shrikant, and his is you need to be a seeker, but when you're seeking and you find, you need to surrender your, you need to do the acceptance. You need to surrender your resistance. These are modern psychological concepts that are just like straight from the A and B you're talking about, straight from A. But start reading B, because there's really good stuff there, and I'm putting it all together in my mind as you talk about this. And you find the Trimtab for you. You need to find it. You need psychological flexibility. You need to have the seeker's mindset and surrender to truth. That's built into modern therapies, and I can say it better now. Then you get your Trimtab. Thank you.
Paul, it would be wonderful if you could do a meetup on that. The thing is that it's just that I've not studied many of these things. You have. So if you would like to do that, it would be wonderful to have you do that anytime you want. Okay.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I want to say one thing here. As people are making comments, I will try to speak of what it is what speaks to me on what people are saying here. I mean, one of the points that Paul made here is that, our modern world is full of dichotomies. The moment you see something like Trimtab, right? Automatically we are saying, okay, this is a machine that I can do to make things better in the world. But suddenly you find that actually the thing that is driving it is this person doing the seeking. So it is a bringing together of the practical and the deeply spiritual, deeply aspirational. You start by saying Trimtab, oh, I can do this. So it's the practical consequences of things that catch your attention. But when you actually look deep into it, it is being powered by the attitude of saying, I will surrender to truth. I will accept what is. So there is that, seeking as seeker, as powering this Trimtab. Another way of saying the same thing is Trimtab brings your attention to the material world. And this automatically takes you to the spiritual world and saying it's the spiritual world that is driving the material, and it's going back and forth. There is this back and forth, continuous loop going on between deep spiritual things and the most common material things, both in terms of input, in terms of seeing things, experiencing things. You saw how much of it is about experience and about doing things in the world, about transforming things. So it's a notion of spirit, which is very different, which is a way of seeing the unity of spiritual and material. Thank you, Paul. Great observations. Next up is going to be Judy and Maggie. Folks would love to hear what you guys think, so just go ahead and type ! Judy.
Thank you. It's been a really incredible evening. And I just went back to Google and Googled the actual epitaph of Buckminster Fuller. And that's where it says there, really clear. So they call me Mr. Tips and call me Ishmael came to mind when I saw call me Trimtab. And I went then to look at what meant call me Ishmael, which was for the first line of Moby Dick. And I went back to say, where did I hear they call me Mr. Tips? And that came from that movie, which is really famous, with Sidney Poitier. And I said, what are these, all three, what do they have in common? So I tried to look for the pattern of they call me or call me, the first two words. And what I found was incredible assurance of these people and integrity and knowledge and really powerful strength that these people had of who they were, the sense of self of who they were, and how much they could contribute to make this a better world, really, because Buckminster Fuller knew what he had done because he put it in his epitaph. And he was not just the rudder, he was the big ship. And then he also, was the little rudder, the Trimtab, but he was all three. But his legacy is the big ship, and it's up to us to continue studying him, because we can learn so much from him, and we are still learning from him. And I don't think it's going to ever end, because he was so, it's like infinity with him, So I learned that I still have to continue learning about him.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There are several things I want to point out. One is this authenticity that comes through. It's this complete intellectual honesty, intellectual courage, which is even rarer, and then complete authenticity, complete embrace of yourself and the world. Both, not you versus the world, but you and the world. And you're speaking to the world directly. And you can look at call me Trimtab in multiple ways. One of the ways is that he is giving us the ideas that will enable us to change our lives. And through that, parts of the world, whatever we can. Another way of looking at it is that, this is again Louis Sullivan, who is also very deeply influenced by transcendentalism, and which is actually influenced by the Indian philosophy, where he uses the organic metaphors of a seed. He says always, in my favorite book of his, which is A System of Architectural Ornament, there is this drawing of a seed germ, of a seed. There is this cotyledons and there is a seed in the middle. Okay, and he says, always remember the seed germ, because that is where the growth lies. It has enough things It's very small. It has enough supporting material within itself that it can take off. And it has that germ. It has that will to power, will to grow, will to do things. And from that little thing, a forest can grow. So it is small and it becomes large in its manifestations. All right. Thank you. Next up is going to be Maggie. Anybody else wants to speak? This is your last chance. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Maggie.
Thanks. I know I kind of hopped in late. A friend of mine was like, Buckminster Fuller talk. And I was like, and I jumped in. We are a group of friends that meet online once a week, and we're doing some really hard stuff. And we've had a lot of conversations about what it is that makes us able to do the hard thing. And we're trying to like suss it out. Like, was it our childhoods? Was it what we like to eat? Like, and I sort of dubbed it our golden walnut, like whatever that thing is inside us that is similar to all of us. And this talk, just the part of it that I got, like the concept of Trimtab, very applicable to so many people in the group. That might be it. The concept of being able to say no to going with the flow. Oh my gosh, yes, that might actually be what it is. Just a lot of it is going to be good stuff for me to bring back to my pals when we hang out again next, so we can try to figure out the mystery of why us. Why are we able to do these things? So thank you.
Thank you, Maggie, and delighted to have you here. I'm going to put this video on our YouTube channel, 52 Living Ideas, within a day or so you can catch up on everything that you missed. And there is a whole bunch. I think we've done about, close to 1,400 meetups. So we have got a whole bunch of videos there. So thank you. All right, Marissa, what are your closing thoughts on this?
As always, thank you to all for helping me further understand this concept. I love hearing the variety of responses, thoughts, questions. It just helps me to get a little bit further along in my studies here. So I think it was great. And I think that's, one of the most powerful things here that we've shared today was the idea, the bits actually that you read to us, which one that stuck with me obviously was the love is metaphysical gravity. And I relate that to this concept of Trimtab, in that it's the integrity aspect of it all. And if you view love in that manner, it grounds you, as it were. So I really like considering it from that angle. And as always, so many new things to consider. I wanted to just point out again the idea of Bucky also said that technology is a trim tab for the entire planet, and its direction is towards the sustainable support of all life. We didn't quite get into those concepts, but I would put technology maybe in the similar realm of psychology, in that there are aspects that exist today that we interact with and deal with every day that possibly wouldn't have been conceivable to Bucky in his time. But the beauty and the timelessness of his concepts is that in no way, shape, or form is this principle denigrated or inapplicable to these newer aspects of our day-to-day. You have but to look at it from these if then type of questions, kind of mull it over in your mind, and you'll find that you can apply this to just about anything that you come across in your day to day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Maritza, have you given a thought of what you're going to do next month, or it's going to take, do you have some candidates? You're on mute.
Oops, I have given it some thoughts, and I'm not quite just yet sure. I was toying with the idea of us, you've mentioned a few times today, and you've mentioned to me offline, that you're fascinated by Bucky's concept of universe. I thought we could have a good, robust conversation on how he views universe, what it means, and how to really deeply look at his definitions of universe.
I think that's a fantastic idea, because it's a core concept of his, because he means completely different
Yes.
universe. And because he kind of means something like totality of all human culture trying to make sense of everything in the universe, including you and your thoughts, and all of it put together, something like that. So yes, I think that's a great idea.
Go with that then. Sweet.
Okay. So I want to tell you what is coming up. So we're going to look at the universe in a month. You'll have to wait for the universe, but universe is always there, all around you and in you. So you can look at it anytime you want. Doesn't mind. It actually likes it very much when you do. So tomorrow we are going to do Gospel of John. We're starting with chapter 16. On Friday, we're going to be talking about Paleolithic and Neolithic divine feminine. We're going to take some things by Isabella Price, Joseph Campbell, and one more person. And we're going to be, it's a short videos of about 20 minutes each. So you're welcome to watch them and then come discuss it. On Saturday at 5 p.m., we're going to do Bhagavad Gita, 2 chapters, I think 5 and 6. On Sunday, 5 p.m., we are going to do The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. We're going through the entire book, and this time we're going to be going through the chapters on love, on marriage, and on children. They are amazing, amazing things. And, if you have not read the book, please do. It's all available for free. You can go on, go to 52 Living Ideas, and you can find both the audio version of it and this one. Actually, Maritza, if you could put that particular meetup in this one, in the chat. And then we are continuing with our Bucky. We're going to have Kurt here, Kurt McNamara here. He's actually writing a book called Bucky for Designers to make Bucky's thought far more accessible to anybody who wants to understand it. And this is going to be his chapter 2. It's going to be on anticipation. What is the meaning of anticipation? It's a very deep concept of Bucky. On Mondays, we do Poetic Mondays. Maritza, do we know what we are doing on this Monday?
Yes, we are doing, our featured poet for Monday is E.A. Houseman. And we're doing Life as Blank. And we're going to fill in the blank when we meet on Monday.
Wonderful. So what we're doing is that we're taking a metaphor, a large enough metaphor. I think life as a child is what we did last time, but something like, life as, you can look at water or tree or air or fire or whatever, we'll pick one of those, and then we will build, our observations of life using that metaphor. We're going to do a collaborative poetry on that. On Tuesday, we're going to be doing, we're going through Art of War. Jason and Amon are translating the book for our group, so don't miss that. It's a very deep discussion. We are on chapter 6 there, and on Wednesday we are going to be, we're going to have Sanjay here, and he has been doing a series on neuroscience. So he'll be taking a topic on neuroscience. So that's what we do. So it's just amazing that we can actually cover such a wide range of topics, and such amazing people show up like yourself, and we have the kind of discussions that we do. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. And thanks, Maritza. This was great. Bye.
Enjoyed. Bye.